I'm June West. I'm the executive director of Memphis Heritage. I've been with Memphis Heritage for 17 years, and I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, and I grew up in Proctor, Arkansas on a farm. Had the best of both worlds, went to school in Memphis, went home to the farm. And I've been working in Memphis for the last 60-odd years doing different things. Memphis Heritage is a 501c3 nonprofit that was started in 1975, so we're in our 43rd year, and it pretty much got started after urban renewal. So many cities went through terrible demolition during urban renewal, thinking all things new were important versus saving things that were old. And finally, they had had enough. And citizens in Memphis had been worried about it for years, like when the Cossett Library changed in 1958, which was smack in the middle of urban renewal. There was a lot of outcry, but there was no organization to actually stand up and fight for it. So the thing that really happened was that Knoxville had a program called Knox Heritage, and Memphis had heard about it, and 4 people in Memphis said, we got to do that same thing. And they met in an architect's office on Madison Avenue above Stewart Hardware and created Memphis Heritage. And it was a volunteer organization for years where people just came together and met and talked about things. And then came the Hill Mansion on Union Avenue, which was one of the last standing gorgeous mansions up and down Union. And that is the catalyst which grew Memphis Heritage. It happened 2 years after Memphis Heritage got started, but since they were created, they had a reason to get out on the streets, and literally they marched and had signs and raised money and to try to buy the building to save it, but alas, it was demolished for a fast food restaurant, which went out of business within a year and a half because nobody would go to it because of the history of the building that came down. Newman Collection came into our lives. The president of the board that hired, when I was hired, was William Chandler. Don's photographs, not the negatives, but his photographs had been held at Vance Color Lab in Memphis, Tennessee. And so when people were told or needed to get old black and white pictures of Memphis or just old pictures of Memphis, they were sent to Vance Color Lab. No one really knew Don's name, but they knew that's where those pictures were. So they would go to Vance and see the notebooks and pick the pictures and go from there. Vance Color Lab went out of business, and Mr. Chandler's father owned the building where Vance was, and so William went in, we call him Willie. Willie went in and found the notebooks, contacted Mrs. Newman and said, what are your plans for this photographic collection? And she was in the process of negotiating and talking to the University of Memphis their Mississippi Valley collection to donate them to them. And he said, would you hold off for a little while and let us talk to you about working with you on this collection and making it something very important to Memphis and also helping Memphis Heritage. And so by the time I came on board, they had already been in conversations with Mrs. Newman, but they had not negotiated the contract. And so I sat down and we negotiated the contract. The estate gets a percentage of the sales of the Newmans, and she understood that by selling and doing reprints of these negatives, we would be able to raise money for an organization that would help save those very buildings that are in the pictures. So it made a lot of sense, and since then, it really, I think 2003 is when we really got going with it, and I love the story that Mrs. Newman had all the original negatives at her house. And so we had the collection books that Don chose. Don actually picked the Newman 1 collection before he passed away, and that became his portfolio, and that was what was at Vance Color Labs. And so when we decided that, you know, that's what we would start with, we're a scrappy agency with not a big budget, and so we did not have the capital to start scanning negatives right and left and then doing prints just to have on hand. And so what we had to do is let the orders drive the scanning. So whenever we'd get an order for an image, a certain number, I would go out to Mrs. Newman's house, get the negative, bring it back to Drew, who would do the scanning, and then I would take it back to Mrs. Newman. So I got to visit with Mrs. Newman a lot in the first couple of years. And fortunately, we had one person that wanted to buy literally 100 pictures out of that collection. So that worked beautifully for us, so we could go ahead and scan 100 pictures and justify it and be able to make the money back to be able to do that. And so that's how it got started. and we have been at it ever since. And the cool thing that we've been able to do is get people and let the community know who Don Newman was. And I think that has been something that was near and dear to my heart, because when somebody's an artist and a true artist that needs to be known and heard, and after talking to Mrs. Newman for all these years and to know the love that Don had for the city, and because these pictures were not contracted pictures. Most of the pictures that are in the collection primarily were things that Don wanted to show and show Memphis's architecture. There were pictures. He was a professional photographer, and that's how he made his living. But most things that were contracted were like internal shots of new equipment that a company had bought or something like that. And he did aerials and stuff. But the buildings, like the one you see to my right or left in the film, I'm not sure, is the Lincoln American Tower. And the fact that, that was just a picture that he knew that building was so significant. The relationship that Memphis Heritage has had with Mrs. Newman and her family has just been wonderful. 3 generations of Newman family members come to events whenever we're introducing a new show for Don's work, or when this grant got kicked off, they attended the great opening that you put on, and it was wonderful. And they are thrilled. Their grandfather, their father, and their husband is being known around town and in Memphis for the amazing work that he did in the 30s all the way to the 70s. First thing that Memphis Heritage did with the collection is actually made some very rough postcards and note cards, to sell at Cooper Young one year. This was before I even came on board, and they were really rough, and they didn't even have a booth at Cooper Young. They just sat on the outskirts of the Cooper Young Festival and sold them. But they were a big hit. So when I came on board, we really got more into the marketing of the collection. We did a whole new group of note cards, postcards, and also started really advertising the prints. I did a major review of local groups that would be able to scan the collection and also print and do archival prints that would be valuable. Don had done silver gelatin prints, because that's what people did back in the day, and those are so expensive and nobody really does those anymore. That was pre-digital. And so the digital work that's done now is that the images are scanned on a very high-end, not the images, I'm sorry, the negatives are scanned at a high-end, on a high-end scanner that gives great resolution, and then they're printed on archival paper, and it's more of a digital process versus an old version of photography. And we the images have sold well in offices, in families' homes, and we've recently grown. We can have them framed, but basically we sell as ordered is how we do it now. We plan on going back and doing some more note cards and postcards this year. We've done some posters. We also use them a lot in our calendars that we publish every year, and we also use them in when we're doing educational presentations to show the past of Memphis architecture. When I was looking to move forward with the Don Newman collection as far as producing prints and reproducing those, and also doing the scanning, I interviewed, like I said, 3 different companies, and Gary's company was the one that we chose. And so Gary Walpole had been working with another photography collection in town, and he knew exactly what we were looking for as far as high quality prints, and so that's where we started, and that's how we got involved with Gary Walpole and Drew Deal, who are also working on this grant, and we've been with them since the very beginning, so we're pleased that it worked out for everybody. One of my goals when I first started seeing the collection, and you've seen them in other cities, coffee table books and stuff that were then and now, and I knew that we had something that was so important for people to understand the transition in Memphis over the years, some good, some bad. And knowing that Gary Walpole was an active photographer at the time and did a lot of work in town, I talked to him and said, would you be interested in helping me put together a then and now presentation, a show? And he said, absolutely. And Gary knew Don, which was really amazing. The fact that he had experienced and visited with Don in the past and didn't work with him directly, but he had great respect for him. So that meant a tremendous amount to me when I was searching for a group to do the production work of the Newman collection. So it all fit in. Everything took care of itself. It was wonderful. Gary and I picked out, we literally went through the collection to kind of figure out which buildings could he get in and on where Don had taken some of these pictures from. And so that kind of regulated the first set of images that we did for Then and Now. And we had our offices on South Main, and we had an art gallery in the very front of those offices, and they had Last Friday trolley tour nights. And so as our kind of swan song, we're very blessed to have a new, we've been here 11 years at Howard Hall, but we had the gallery there, and so our swan song when we left South Main was to have the Then and Now show. And so Gary took color pictures in 2006 of what, from the same perspective that Don took, and we had the black and white then and the color images as Gary's for now, and it was amazingly received. And then I started using it as a PowerPoint to go around and talk to children in the Memphis schools about what Memphis was and what we are now. And by showing them pictures of buildings that were just amazing, but unfortunately are lost now, they were able to understand a little bit more about what Memphis Heritage does. So picture tells 1,000 words, and it has been a real benefit to us to have that collection. We also did the calendar Then and Now for the same very reason. Just it's really a truly wonderful tool to educate the community and anyone that's coming into Memphis about what we have been and where we are and where we're going. And so it plays a huge role. So the collection has just been, I mean, when I really think about it, it has been a huge, not only a financial help to Memphis Heritage, but a huge part of our educational program. The Newman Collection has been, as I said, such a wonderful asset to Memphis Heritage. And most recently, we have had requests to do wall-sized prints, literally as wallpaper, in businesses and stuff. And so when you have a negative, as Don's were, 8x10 negatives, you can blow these images, enlarge them tremendously, where you can actually recognize your aunt in the photograph if you really wanted to. And those have been very successful. We've got one out at Graceland, the Beale Street at Night image, and it's probably 20 feet by 15 feet. So if you can imagine. So moving in that direction, expanding the opportunities of what we can do as far as producing materials for people. We recently used one of the Don Newmans in a Hallmark special that was done Christmas at Graceland, where they came over, the art director came and picked out the picture he wanted to use, and we actually colorized parts of it for them to show as part of the Christmas season. And it plays a role in the movie where the young lady finds it in an antique store and gives it to the owner of the bank that she's purchasing. So it's really amazing. I have worked with a lot of films in town for them to come look at the images for that certain year, and so they have been able to say, what did the street signs look like in this day? What direction was this going, so that they can be accurate in their filming. So that's another benefit for these photographs. But I look forward to continuing our relationship with the Newman family and bringing more attention to his collection to others around. And we do have a website, newmansmemphis.org, where people can see these collections, but we have multiple images that we've still not even archived yet. So finding the capital to be able to scan all the Newmans to protect them going into the future is a big part of what I would like to see happen over the next several years, and to be able to expose his work to more and more people. You can look at Don's work as educational in the sense of what the image is about, and you can also look at the work and see the talent of Don Newman as an artist, as a photographer. And I think that is vital, that no one really brought attention to early on in this collection, when it was just used for documenting something on a chamber wall or something. So I think, to me, realizing the eye that Don had and the capacity to get an entire huge building in one shot without, I can't even imagine walking up to some of these towering buildings and trying to get it in one picture. It's just, and with what he was using, an 8x10 camera on a tripod that weighed 40 pounds, and he would haul this all over town. I have a great, real quick story that, and that is, we had, during our process downtown when we were introducing the collection to the public, we had a church group of Dons came to see the show. Bertha May brought them down, and we had lunch at the arcade and everything. And so I stopped a couple of the people to talk to them about their memories of Don. And one guy said, yeah, I was going down Union one day, and Don was in the middle of the street with his tripod getting ready to take pictures. And I said, you want to go get a sandwich? And he said, sure, let me just get this shot. And he said, 3 hours later, we went and got a sandwich. So to me, that tells it all, that that's how dedicated Don was to. When we're able to show a building that has been saved and restored, like the Gayoso or the Majestic Grill, which was the Majestic Theater, the Orpheum, those types of things, it's really rewarding. But when we have to show something like our old Union Station, which was on the corner of 3rd and G.E. Patterson, which was called Calhoun, and we show that huge loss of this magnificent marble building to a very, very bland, flat-roofed post office, we then realize, you know, how important that was and what a great loss it was. And you can't go back. Once they're gone, they're gone. One of the most amazing things about preservation is that you can create a list of most endangered properties in your town, and then put them on a list and hope to educate individuals on how important they are and what they could be and how cool it would be if they did it. Jimmy Ogle, who's also working with this grant, and I met one day, we were trying to keep the Pinch district in North Memphis on the National Register as well. And he walked in and he said, June, do you realize that of the 13 buildings that you have on your endangered list, 11 have been restored in the last 5 years? And I had not thought of it that way because I'm so busy all the time, I'm just kind of running. But it was a really eureka moment for us. And those buildings, many of them, like the Tennessee Brewery, the Chisca Hotel, actually the law school, which Don took gorgeous pictures of, which was our original customs house, which then became the downtown post office in the 20s. They built around the custom house, and now that whole building is our present law school for the University of Memphis. And so it's quite amazing that the progress that Memphis has seen. And one of the most influential things I think that Don's work shows the glory and the presence of these buildings. I think today what we always must think about is the economic development that this brings to our city, and how restoring and repurposing of these historic properties, what it brings to Memphis as a whole. And we've met with the mayor, and there has been a thing around the country these days about the cities and who has the most cranes in the air to determine how development is happening. And so I went and met with Mayor Strickland and said, you know, we've got a great branding idea here, and that is that, yeah, we have a lot of cranes in the air, but we also save and repurpose our historic downtown buildings where Nashville and Austin did not. And so we should be very proud of that and use that. And so it's a big throwback to Don's work, because you can really establish the beauty and the gloriousness of these properties when you look at them that way, and you can't help but see how they could be used in the future and how grand they can be. So it keeps Memphis authentic, which other cities are not. We don't want to be USA anywhere. We want to be Memphis. Historic preservation in any city is, to me, one of the most important things they could highlight. I think growth in cities without a plan is very scary to a lot of people, and for many, many years Memphis hadn't had a plan. We are 6th in the nation on the number of properties on the National Register. I want to say that one more time. We are 6th in the nation on the number of properties on the National Register, and that's Memphis, Tennessee. We only have 5 other towns in front of us, and you know, it's Washington, New Orleans, Baltimore, and the other one I've spaced out. But basically, when you think about that, that puts us on a map that not many people can take claim to. And that's something that I think our city needs to emphasize more. And so moving forward, I'm hoping that our planning department can recognize the importance of our historic neighborhoods, because that's where a lot of those buildings are standing that make us 6th in the nation. Transition of neighborhoods into the next century is frightening in a lot of ways, because I think one of the reasons people want to be in historic neighborhoods is because that they want that authenticity. When places get exciting and people want to live in Midtown Memphis, and developers are used to developing things in East Memphis where they have no restrictions, and they come into Midtown and they get hit with restrictions because they are historic neighborhoods, the developers kind of fight back. They don't understand it. It's just that they don't see it through our eyes. And so we can't, I mean, we don't blame them by any means, but we want to help educate them and help them understand why there's such a passion for maintaining historic neighborhoods and keeping our realness as Memphis alive, and not putting inappropriate buildings into historic neighborhoods. New architecture would be fine. That's not a problem. It's just height and how it's placed on the land and things like that. But it's a big step forward for Memphis to create a plan, and they're working on that now. I'm hoping it's successful. When a city is trying to create a plan on what you want to be in the future, and Memphis is at our 200th anniversary this year, so we're looking at a plan called 3.0 for the third century of Memphis. And I think you don't want to stifle development. Memphis is in a situation of build up, not out, and I think that's very important. I think having density is important, but you have to do it with a sense of design, a sense of appropriateness, and oftentimes that does not happen. Oftentimes it's the quickest thing to get in the ground, and they see it as tax-based finance money coming in, and we just have to kind of slow down. When I opened the first assisted living property, it was the first one in town, and then after that it was like 100 different companies came forth and did it, and that's always the way it is. But oftentimes when you rush and commit to a specific redevelopment situation, it often fizzles, and you have too much of one thing because it's hot at the time. And so that may seem a little vague, but we build thousands of apartments in Midtown, and if those don't get lived in, which we hope they do, then what happens to those buildings later? So there's a lot of future thinking that we have to do to effectively move Memphis forward, and that didn't happen in previous years. What we did was we built out all the way east, and then Memphis had to take care of that infrastructure. And when citizens moved out of the center of the city, we didn't have the tax base to cover the cost to do any of that. And so in lieu of controlling developers to a certain area, which is an unheard of thing in Memphis because we were started by developers, it's hard to regulate in an effective way oftentimes without people saying, oh, you're a brick hugger, or you just don't want progress to happen, and all those things, and that's absolutely false as far as historic preservation is concerned. It makes a great tagline, but it is not where we're coming from at all. We want to see development, redevelopment, but we have shown recently with the William Ellis building that don't run to tear it down until you have a plan, because finally, after they had a demo permit for it, after 2 years, they're now saving it and incorporating it into a new hotel that's going to be fabulous on Beale Street. These buildings were built to last. You've got buildings downtown that are so much more stable than and will last longer than anything we build today. So I think that's one consciousness that the Newman Collection brings to the forefront, is look at these buildings that were built in the late 1800s or early 1900s and how they're standing and they're straight and they're in good shape, and if you maintain them and restore them, they will be here for another 100 years. So I think if I had to say what role did the Newman Collection play, it would be they were here then, they're here now. So then and now, a whole nother overview of those two words. The Newman Collection, as I've mentioned before, plays a vital role in our work in educating and also financially in helping us keep our nonprofit alive. I think respecting the work as an artistic collection is very important to me, and fulfilling a dream, I think, for Bertha May, that Don's work be seen in the future and for future generations after we're all gone, and that's what we hope to establish with his collection and have it be available to Memphians for years to come, online and in other ways. We must protect the collection, and we want to hopefully be able to do that in the future by making sure all the images, negatives are protected or scanned or saved in some way so that they can go forward. I think as generations change and everything kind of goes in a circle, history repeats itself. So I'm hoping that through different generations, they will see the value and the importance of our historic properties through the Newman Collection and realize you don't want to replace or rebuild old, but you want to respect what's there and then address it through design and rebuild and development to make it all work together and be authentic. And I think the Newman Collection does that not only for city planning, but also for the human sense of place. We don't stop and think about how our environment affects us on a regular basis. But if you think about it, if you were to go and stand in a park, how do you feel? And then you go and stand in a garbage yard, how do you feel? I mean, we don't take the time to think about it. Now that's an extreme, but basically your sense of place and where even the street you drive on affects your psychic. And so people don't think about that very much, but buildings are important to us in our sense of place in our lives. Memphis Heritage is just blessed to really have this collection, and we're very grateful to the Newman family for believing in us and giving us the opportunity to work with his collection.